Sign it, I'm not asking twice. Daniel slammed the divorce papers onto the kitchen table so hard the coffee cups rattled. Emily flinched. She was 6 months pregnant. Her father had been buried less than 20 hours ago. The funeral flowers were still in the trash can by the door. And her husband of 7 years was standing over her, jaw tight, eyes cold, pointing at a signature line like she was an obstacle he needed to remove from his calendar. He did not ask if she was okay. He did not even look at her belly. He just stood there, waiting. If a man like this makes your blood run cold, stay with me. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The morning after Thomas Carter was buried, the apartment felt wrong in a way that Emily could not explain but could feel in her bones. It was not the silence. Silence she could handle. She had grown up in quiet houses, learning to read the meaning behind the absence of sound. It was not the gray October light pressing through the kitchen window or the untouched cups of coffee that 2 neighbors had brought by and left on the counter before giving her apologetic smiles and slipping out the door. It was Daniel. The way he moved through the apartment that morning was the thing that made the hair on her arms stand up before her brain caught up to what her body already knew. He was not moving like a man who had just lost his father-in-law. He was not moving like a man in grief or even like a man pretending to be in grief. He was moving like someone who had been waiting a very long time to get somewhere and had finally been given permission to go. He made his own coffee, did not ask if she wanted any. He showered, shaved, put on a shirt she had never seen before. Emily noticed the shirt because she had done all of his laundry for 7 years. Every single piece of clothing her husband owned had passed through her hands at least once. This shirt had not. It was a dark slate blue, fitted well, expensive in the way that things are expensive when someone else chooses them for you. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed flat against the frame for balance because the baby had shifted in the night and her lower back was screaming when Daniel came out of the bedroom and saw her standing there. He did not say good morning. He sat down at the kitchen table, folded his hands in front of him, and said, "Emily, we need to talk." 7 words. She had heard those 7 words before in her life. She had heard them from doctors with bad news. She had heard them from her father, sitting across from her at a diner table, the week after she told him she was pregnant, when he wanted to make sure she knew he was going to be there no matter what. She had heard them from friends who needed to confess something they had done wrong. She had never heard them from her husband, and she had certainly never heard them in that tone. Flat, prepared, like he had rehearsed them somewhere. Maybe in the car on the way home from the cemetery the day before, or maybe in the shower 20 minutes ago, running through the words while the water ran down his back. She walked to the table slowly. She lowered herself into the chair across from him. She placed both hands on top of her belly without thinking about it, the way she always did when she felt uncertain, as if the roundness of it was a kind of anchor. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel looked at the table for a moment. Just one moment, then he looked up at her. "I want a divorce," he said. Emily heard the words. She understood the words individually. She knew what each one meant. But the sentence as a whole did not land immediately. It floated in the air between them, suspended, like a glass someone had thrown toward the floor that had not yet shattered. "What?" she said. "I want a divorce, Emily." She stared at him. "Daniel, my father was buried yesterday, I know. I am 6 months pregnant. I know that too." She felt something shift inside her. Not the baby. Something deeper than that. Something she would not be able to name for a long time. It was the exact moment, though she did not recognize it yet, when her understanding of who she was in the world began to completely rewrite itself. Are you having some kind of—" She stopped. Breathed. Tried again. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" Daniel looked at her steadily. And that was the thing about him, the thing that Emily would come back to in the months that followed, turning it over and over in her mind like a stone she kept finding in her pocket. He was calm, not the calm of someone who was holding it together by sheer willpower. The calm of someone who had already processed this, who had already moved through every difficult emotion on their own time, privately, without her, who was now simply delivering information. "I have been unhappy for a long time," he said. "I should have said something sooner. That's on me. But I can't keep going like this, Emily. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me." "Not fair to me," she repeated. "I know this is the worst timing. My father died yesterday, Daniel." Her voice cracked on the last word. She had not meant it to. She pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling for a second, looked back at him. He was in the ground for less than a day, I know. You were standing next to me, I know. You held my hand at the church. He had not actually. She realized that even as she said it, he had stood beside her, but he had not held her hand. She had reached for him at some point during the service, and his hand had been in his coat pocket. She had told herself it was because he was cold. She had told herself a lot of things. Emily, I'm sorry, I truly am. The timing is terrible. But staying would be worse. Staying when I feel like this, when I know what I know, that would be worse. She looked at him. Something cold moved through her. What do you know? She asked quietly. What is it that you know, Daniel? He was quiet, and in that quiet, Emily Carter understood. Not everything, not yet. But enough. There's someone else, she said. It was not a question. Daniel held her gaze. The glass hit the floor. Emily did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not stand up and demand answers, not right away. She sat very still in the kitchen chair with both hands on her belly, and she looked at her husband of 7 years across a table that they had argued over buying because it was $40 more than they had budgeted, and she said nothing for so long that Daniel actually shifted in his seat. How long? She finally said. How long, Daniel? He breathed through his nose. About 8 months. 8 months. The baby inside her was 6 months along, which meant that while Emily was learning she was pregnant, while she was sitting in the bathroom of the apartment they shared, staring at a little plastic test with shaking hands, while she was figuring out how to tell him, Daniel had already been somewhere else emotionally. Had already been building something with someone else. Had already, in all the ways that mattered, made his choice. Who is she? Emily asked. That doesn't matter right now. It matters to me. He looked away, looked back. Her name is Sophia. Sophia Reed. The name meant nothing to Emily in that moment. It would mean quite a lot later. But in that kitchen, on that gray October morning, 23 hours after she had watched her father's coffin be lowered into the ground, the name was just a sound. Just another thing that did not quite compute. Does she know I'm pregnant? Emily asked. Yes, and you still want to? Yes. Emily stood up. It took her a moment to get her balance, and Daniel reached forward automatically, reflexively, to steady her, and she looked at his hand on her arm, and something in her expression made him pull it back. She walked to the window. She stood there looking out at the street below. A bus went by, a woman walked a small dog, 2 kids on bikes cut past each other laughing about something. The world was still going. You need to give me some time, she said. I can't do this today, Emily. Not today, Daniel. She turned to look at him. You have had 8 months to prepare for this conversation. I had about 45 seconds, so you can give me a few days. He nodded. He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Where are you going? She asked. I thought I'd give you some space. Of course you did, she said softly, and she listened to his footsteps cross the apartment, and the front door open, and she stood at the window with her hands on her belly and watched the street below until she could not see clearly anymore. She did not realize she was crying until she tasted salt. Emily Carter cried for a long time that morning. She cried the way people cry when they have been holding it back through something public, something that required them to be composed, and then they are finally alone and the walls come down all at once. She cried for her father, she cried for her marriage. She cried for the version of her life she had believed she was living. She cried until her back ached and her eyes burned and the baby kicked, twice, hard, as if protesting the emotion radiating through the body around it. She pressed a hand against the kick and said out loud, to the empty room, I know, sweetheart. I know. That was when her phone buzzed. She almost did not answer it. The screen said Richard Hayes, a name she barely recognized. Her father had mentioned a Richard once or twice, always in the way he mentioned things he clearly considered too mundane to explain. She had assumed Richard was a coworker, maybe a neighbor from years ago. She answered anyway. Miss Carter, said a voice on the other end. Measured, professional. The voice of someone who chose words carefully. My name is Richard Hayes. I was your father's financial advisor. I'm very sorry for your loss. I know this is an extraordinarily difficult time, and I apologize for calling so soon after the funeral. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand. Thank you, she said, because it was the response she had been giving automatically for 3 days. I won't keep you, Richard said, but there is something your father wanted me to make sure happened, within 48 hours of his passing, and I am obligated to honor that. As a pause, he asked that you visit our offices downtown today if possible. Tomorrow at the latest, Emily almost laughed. Today, she repeated. I understand completely if you need more time. But these were his explicit instructions, Ms. Carter. He was quite specific. She thought about the apartment. The kitchen table where her husband had just dismantled her life. The coffee that was getting cold. The gray light. What time, she said. The offices of Hayes Financial Partners were not what Emily expected. She had expected something modest. Her father's version of everything was modest. The car he drove, the watch he wore, the apartment he had lived in for 30 years, the lunch pail he carried to the school where he worked every single morning of her childhood. Thomas Carter had never owned anything that was not practical, sensible, and quietly worn. She had assumed any financial connection of his would match that profile. Hayes Financial Partners occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the heart of Chicago's financial district. The lobby alone was the size of the entire floor where her father had worked. The elevator required a security badge. The woman at the front desk had the particular, practiced composure of someone accustomed to managing the expectations and anxieties of very important people. Emily, in her black coat with the buttons that no longer quite closed over her belly, was not a very important person. She was a woman who had cried all morning and quickly fixed her makeup in the car. She was a woman who did not belong in a lobby like this, and she knew it. But the woman at the front desk looked up when Emily says her name, and something changed in her expression. Not condescension, not surprise, something closer to recognition, as if she had been told who would be arriving. Carter, she said, Mr. Hayes has been expecting you. I'll take you up, not we'll call him, not one moment, please. She stood up and walked Emily to the elevator herself. Richard Hayes was a man in his late 60s with silver hair and the kind of deeply creased face that comes from decades of carrying responsibilities that cannot be shared. He shook Emily's hand with both of his, held it for just a moment longer than a regular handshake, and looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. It was grief. She recognized it eventually because she was wearing it too. He talked about you constantly, Richard said. For 30 years, every meeting we ever had, every call, he always found a way to bring up Emily. She felt the tears threaten again and press them back. You said he left specific instructions. He did. Richard gestured for her to sit. But first, I want to ask you something, Miss Carter, and I want you to understand that whatever your answer is, it won't change what comes next. I just want to understand where you are. He paused. Did your father ever tell you anything? Anything at all about where he came from? Before Chicago? Emily thought of her father the way she always thought of him. Steady, quiet, the smell of wood chips and coffee, the sound of his boots on the kitchen floor in the mornings. The look on his face every time she did something he was proud of, which was often a look of such naked, uncomplicated love that she had never needed to question whether she was wanted. He said he grew up back east, she said. He never talked much about his family. He said they didn't get along. She looked at Richard. Was there more? There was considerably more, Richard said quietly. He reached into the desk drawer and produced an envelope, sealed with her name written on the front in her father's handwriting. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It looked like architecture. Every letter perfectly formed, nothing wasted, nothing careless. She took the envelope. Her hands were shaking. Take your time, Richard said. He rose from his chair. I'll step out. No, she said. Yes, please. He sat back down. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 4 pages front and back in that same precise handwriting. She would read it 1,000 times in the coming weeks. She would memorize sentences. She would find herself reciting passages in the middle of the night to the ceiling above her bed. But the first time she read it, sitting in Richard Hayes' office with the Chicago skyline behind her, and her father's financial advisor watching her quietly from across the desk as it passed through her like a current. She read it once, turned back to the first page and read it again. Then she looked up at Richard. His name wasn't Thomas Carter, she said. No, Richard said, it wasn't. He was born Thomas Alexander Whitmore. Yes. She put the letter down on the desk because her hands could no longer hold it steadily. He walked away from the letter says. He walked away from a family fortune. A dynasty. He just left it. When he was 26 years old, Richard confirmed. His family wanted him to marry a woman chosen for business reasons. A merger essentially dressed up as a marriage. Your father refused. He had met your mother by then, and when he refused, his family cut him off completely. Richard's voice was measured, but not without feeling. They told him he was nothing without the Whitmore name, that he would come crawling back within a year. He never went back, Emily said. He never went back. Richard looked at her steadily. Instead, he changed his name, moved to Chicago, and began again. He became the man you knew, the maintenance worker, the father who repaired his own furniture. Emily stared at the letter. But he didn't. The letter says he was investing the whole time. Your father had considerable knowledge of markets, Richard said. It was in his blood whether he wanted it to be or not. He understood money intuitively. He chose not to use it for himself. He paused. But he used it for you. What does that mean? Richard opened a second folder on his desk. He turned it to face her. Emily looked at the number on the first page. She looked up at Richard, looked back at the page. That can't be right, she said. It is absolutely right. She stopped. The number did not look real. Numbers that large stopped being numbers in a practical sense. They became something closer to a concept, an abstraction. Your father spent 30 years quietly, building an investment portfolio through third-party vehicles and holding companies, Richard said. He was careful, he was patient, he was candidly extraordinarily brilliant at it. And his explicit and legally documented wish was that every dollar, every holding, every asset be transferred to you. His only child, his sole heir. Richard's voice softened. He built it with one purpose, Miss Carter. He wanted to make sure that no matter what happened in your life, no matter who came or went, you would never be trapped. Never be dependent, never be without choices. He paused. He said he watched your marriage and worried. He never told you that. But he worried. Emily pressed both hands flat on the desk. She was breathing through her mouth. The baby moved. The skyline outside the window was enormous and very far away. He knew, she said. He knew about Daniel? He didn't know specifics, Richard said carefully. But your father was a very perceptive man. He paid attention to the people in your life. He noticed things. She thought about the last conversation she had with her father 3 weeks before he died. He had called her on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. He usually called on Sundays. She had been folding laundry. She had balanced the phone between her ear and her shoulder, distracted, only half present in the way that you are when someone is always there, when you believe completely that they will always be there. He had said, Emily, are you happy? She had said, Dad, of course. I'm good. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know you can always come home, right? No matter what. No matter what shape it's in, you always have somewhere to go. She had laughed. She had said, Dad, I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm not going anywhere. And she had changed the subject. She understood now what he was trying to tell her. He had been trying to say goodbye. He had also been trying to say, I see you. I see what's happening. And I have made sure you will be okay. She picked up the letter again. Her hands were steadier now. He told me something, she said, right before he died. 3 words, he said, go to the bank. Richard nodded. Those were his final instructions to you, delivered as simply as he lived his life. He never wanted me to know, Emily said slowly, while he was alive. He never wanted me to know about the money. He wanted you to choose your life freely, Richard said, without the weight of it changing your decisions, without it attracting the wrong kind of people, without you ever wondering whether someone was with you for the right reasons. He met her eyes. He wanted you to be loved the way he loved you, completely. Without conditions. Emily sat back. She placed a hand on her stomach. The baby was very still now, as if listening. She thought about Daniel at the kitchen table that morning. That new shirt, those folded hands, that prepared, patient, already decided voice. She thought about Sophia Reed, a name she had heard for the first time an hour ago, and which now felt like something sharp she had accidentally swallowed. She thought about standing beside her father's grave in the rain, holding her umbrella in one hand and her belly in the other, and the way Daniel had stood 3 steps to her left, and the way he had checked his phone twice during the minister's final words. She had told herself she was imagining things. She had not been imagining anything. What do I do now? She asked Richard, not as a practical question. Not about money or paperwork or legal transfers. She meant it in the larger sense. In the sense of a person who has just had the floor come up to meet them and is trying to remember how to stand. Richard was quiet for a moment, then he said, Your father left one more instruction. It's the last page of the letter. She turned to the last page, her father's handwriting at the bottom of the page. Just a few lines, she read them, and for the first time since she had walked into this office, she did not feel like crying. She felt something else, something she could not quite name yet. It was small and it was quiet, and it sat in her chest like an ember that has not yet been fanned but is not in danger of going out. Her father had written, "Emily, you have always been the best thing I ever made. Not because of your accomplishments, not because of how the world sees you. Because of who you are when no one is watching, that is the inheritance that matters. The money is just a tool. Use it the way we used to use the tools in the garage. For building things, not for tearing things down." She folded the letter, she put it back in the envelope. She looked at Richard Hayes across the desk. "I need a few days," she said. "Of course. And I'm going to need you to explain everything to me from the beginning. How it works, what I actually have access to, what my father set up." "I will explain every detail." She stood up. It took a moment. Richard did not reach to help her. He waited, and she found her footing, and she straightened up, and she was steady. "One more thing," she said. "My father, the way he lived. The way he chose to live, he could have had anything. He could have had the best of everything." "Yes," Richard said. "He chose a lunch pail and an old car and a neighborhood where everybody knew his name. He did." Emily looked out the window at the Chicago skyline for a long moment. "I want to understand that," she said quietly. "Before I understand anything else about what he left me, I want to understand why he made that choice." Richard Hayes looked at her for a moment with that expression she had initially struggled to categorize. Grief, yes, but also something warmer than that, something that looked unexpectedly like admiration. "I think," he said slowly, "that you already do." She took the elevator back down to the lobby. She walked through the door and out onto the street. The October air hit her face, sharp and real. The city moved around her the way it always moved, fast and indifferent and full of people going somewhere. Emily Carter stood on the sidewalk outside a financial building in downtown Chicago with an envelope in her hand and a secret inside her that was bigger than anything Daniel Brooks had ever imagined. She did not feel powerful. She felt something quieter than power and more durable. She felt, for the first time since the words "I want a divorce" had landed in her kitchen that morning, like someone who knew where the ground was. She put the envelope in her bag. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and she walked to her car. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Brooks was with Sophia Reed, telling a version of his life story in which Emily was a chapter that was finished. A chapter that had ended cleanly, sadly, but necessarily, because he was meant for more. He was telling her about his ambitions. He was telling her about the future he could see for himself, now that the path was clear. He did not know as he told that story that the woman he had left at a kitchen table that morning had just walked out of a meeting that rewrote everything. He did not know that the path he thought he had cleared for himself ran directly through ground he did not understand. He did not know that the quiet woman he had dismissed, the grieving pregnant woman he had sat across from, with his folded hands and his prepared speech, was carrying something that no shirt he had never seen. No new beginning, no carefully chosen future could compete with. He did not know, not yet. Emily Carter got in her car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The baby moved again, a long, slow roll like a wave. She put her hand flat on her belly. "We're going to be okay," she said. "I promise you. We are going to be more than okay." She started the car, she pulled out into traffic, and she drove. Emily did not sleep that night. She lay in the bed that still smelled like Daniel's shampoo on his side of the pillow, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought about her father writing that letter. 4 pages, front and back, in that careful handwriting that looked like architecture. She thought about him sitting somewhere quiet, at a desk she had never seen, in a life she had never fully understood, choosing every word with the same deliberate patience he brought to everything. She thought about him sealing the envelope and writing her name on the front, and handing it to Richard Hayes and saying, "Make sure she gets this within 48 hours. He had known he was dying, he had not told her, because telling her would have meant explaining everything else. And Thomas Carter, the man who believed that a person's value should never be measured in dollars, had spent 30 years protecting his daughter from the weight of what he carried. He had carried it alone so she could walk upright. Emily pressed her face into the pillow and breathed. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate push against her ribs. She put her hand there automatically. "I know," she said softly to the dark. "I know, baby, we're going to figure this out." She did not believe it completely yet. But she said it anyway, because sometimes you say a thing out loud before you believe it, and the saying of it is the first step toward it becoming true. Her father had taught her that too, without ever putting it into those exact words. By 3 a.m, she had stopped trying to sleep. She turned on the lamp, reached into the bag on the nightstand, and pulled out the envelope. She had already read the letter twice. She read it again, this time slower. This time she let herself to stop at the sentences that made her breath catch instead of pushing through them. He had written, near the middle of the second page, "I watched you build your life with such faith. Faith in people, faith in the good you assumed was inside them. That faith is not a weakness, Emily. It is the best thing about you. But faith without eyes open is just hope dressed up as certainty. I am leaving you this so that you always have a choice, so that no door is ever closed to you because someone else holds the key." She read that part 4 times. Faith without eyes open is just hope dressed up as certainty. She thought about Daniel, about the 8 months she now knew about. 8 months of parallel lives running side by side without her seeing it. 8 months of a man coming home to her, sitting across from her at dinner, reaching past her in the kitchen for a glass, sleeping in the same bed, and carrying a whole secret life in his chest like something he had swallowed and learned to breathe around. She wondered how many times she had looked directly at him during those 8 months and seen something that was not there anymore. At 4:30 a.m, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Daniel, she set the phone face down on the nightstand. It buzzed again. She turned it over, a text this time. "We should talk about the apartment. Practical things. Call me when you can, practical things." Emily read the message 3 times. Then she put the phone back down, face down again, and she thought about all the ways in which Daniel Brooks processed the world as a series of practical things to be arranged and optimized and sorted it efficiently into the correct column. She had loved that about him once, his clarity, his decisiveness. The way he moved through problems like they were puzzles that simply required the correct approach. She had not understood until now that she had been one of his puzzles, that he had assessed her and placed her, and then when she no longer fit the vision he was building for himself, had made the practical decision to reorganize. She did not respond to the text. She got up, went to the kitchen, made herself decaf, and sat at the table where he had handed her divorce papers 22 hours ago. She sat in the exact chair where she had been sitting when her world rearranged itself. She sat there deliberately because she had a feeling that if she avoided this table, it would become something she was afraid of. And Thomas Carter had raised a woman who did not let rooms become things she was afraid of. At 9 a.m, she called Richard Hayes. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter, how are you holding up?" "I've been better," she said honestly. "I read the letter again last night. I imagined you might. I have questions I expected you would. That's why I cleared my morning." She pulled a notepad toward her. She had written things down in the night, in the margins of whatever paper she could find, questions that formed themselves and would not stop until she captured them. "The portfolio," she said. "The investments. Can I access them?" "Some portions immediately, yes. Others are structured with intentional delays, which your father built in specifically to prevent any rushed decisions. He was very deliberate about the architecture of it. He built in delays," she repeated. "Even in how he left the money, he was protecting me from myself. From impulsive grief," he said. "He did not want you making major decisions in the first months. He wanted you to have access to enough to be comfortable and secure immediately, but not enough to feel like you had to do something with it right away." Emily almost smiled. "That is exactly the most Thomas Carter thing I have ever heard." "He was a remarkable man," Richard said quietly. "I have worked with many wealthy individuals over 40 years, Miss Carter. Remarkable is not a word I use carelessly." She tapped her pen on the notepad. "Tell me about the holdings. Walk me through what he actually built." What Richard walked her through over the next 90 minutes was not what Emily had imagined when she first saw that number on the page in his office. She had imagined it as a pile, a mass, something static and enormous sitting in an account somewhere. What her father had actually built was something alive. A network of investments, partnerships, trusts, and holdings that had been growing for 3 decades like a root system beneath ordinary ground. Real estate in 4 cities, equity stakes in a dozen companies, some of them names she recognized, some of them private and known only within specific industries. Bonds, international funds, A patent portfolio that had been generating quiet income for 15 years. A company with a name that meant nothing to anyone, know where to look. He was brilliant, Richard said, and the word landed without decoration. Not in a showy way. In a patient way, he never chased returns. He built positions over years and let them compound. He understood something that most people with access to this kind of capital never understand. What? Emily said, that the goal was never to have more. The goal was to make sure you always had enough to be free. That was the word he used in every conversation we ever had about the portfolio. Free. Emily wrote the word on her notepad, circled it. Free. Her father had spent 30 years quietly engineering her freedom while wearing old jackets and driving an outdated car and bringing a lunch pail to a school where he fixed broken things for a salary that nobody in the world of Hayes Financial Partners would have considered worth getting out of bed for. She thought about the times she had offered to help him financially. Small moments. When she got her first real job and called him proud and said, "Dad, I want to send you something every month. I want to help." And he had laughed in that way he had, warm and completely genuine, and said, "Emily, I am perfectly fine. Save your money. Save it like it might matter someday, because it might." She had thought he was being proud, refusing her help because accepting it would feel like admitting he needed it. He had not needed it. He had been sitting on a fortune that could have purchased the company she worked for and barely felt it. He never once, she said slowly, let me worry about him. He worried about you instead, Richard said. That was the arrangement he preferred. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me even if you think it might be upsetting. Of course. Did he know about Daniel, about what kind of man he was? Did he know before he died? Richard was careful in the way he chose his next words. She could hear him being careful, the small pause, the measured breath. Your father never made specific accusations to me, he said. But in our last meeting, about 6 weeks before he passed, he said something I have been thinking about since the funeral. A pause. He said, Richard, whatever happens in Emily's personal life after I'm gone, I need to know the structure is airtight. I need to know that nothing can be claimed by a spouse without her explicit and informed consent. I need to know she is protected. Emily's hand tightened around the pen. He said that 6 weeks ago, she said, 6 weeks ago. While he was dying, Richard confirmed softly. That was one of his last conversations about the portfolio. Making sure the legal protections were complete. Making sure that whatever came, you were not exposed. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose. He knew, she said, not a question. He saw something, Richard said. I don't know what specifically. But Thomas Carter paid attention, and what he saw made him want to be certain. She thought about that Tuesday afternoon phone call 3 weeks before he died. Are you happy, Emily? You know you can always come home, right? He had been trying to tell her. He had been trying to say it without saying it, in the way that fathers who love their children sometimes cannot bring themselves to name the thing they are afraid of. Because naming it makes it real, and they would rather protect their child from the weight of it for just a little longer. She set the pen down. Okay, she said, what do I need to do first? First, we meet with the estate attorney. Formal transfer of the accounts begins there. I can have that arranged for Monday morning if that works. Monday works. Second, I would strongly recommend retaining a divorce attorney. Given the assets involved, the timing of the filing, and the circumstances, you want excellent legal representation before Daniel's attorneys have any idea what they are dealing with. He doesn't know, Emily said, about any of it. No, Richard said. And I would recommend keeping it that way for as long as strategically possible. She thought about Daniel's text that morning. Practical things. She thought about him sitting somewhere with Sophia Reed, dividing up his future, calculating what he would take from the marriage and what he would leave behind. She thought about him deciding what Emily was worth in practical terms. He had significantly miscalculated. I'll find an attorney, she said. Can you recommend someone? I have already taken the liberty of reaching out to one, Richard said. She is the best family law attorney in Chicago. She was already Thomas's first choice if this situation ever arose. Emily stopped. He had a first-choice divorce attorney picked out for me. He had a contingency for everything, Richard said. And she could hear the quiet grief in his voice when he said it. That was who he was. She sat with that for a moment. Her father planning for the possibility that her marriage might fail. Not hoping for it, planning for it, because he loved her enough to prepare for the worst even while she was certain he had hoped every single day that the worst would not come. It had come, and he had already built the door she would need. She ended the call with Richard and sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. Then she opened her phone, went to her contacts, and found the number for her best friend, a woman named Carla, who had known Emily since they were 19 and who had never, not once in 15 years, sugarcoated a single thing. Carla answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you were going to call me. I've been staring at my phone since yesterday." "You heard," Emily said. "Daniel called Marcus." Carla said Marcus was her husband. "He called Marcus to give him a heads up, like he was being thoughtful, like he was doing us a favor." Her voice had the particular quality of a woman containing an enormous amount of controlled fury. Tell me everything right now." Emily told her everything. Not just the divorce. Not just the papers on the table and the 8 months and the name Sophia Reed. She told her about the drive downtown, the lobby, Richard Hayes. The letter, the number on the page. All of it. When she was finished, there was silence on the other end of the line for so long that Emily said, "Carla?" "I am here," Carla said. "I am sitting down because I had to sit down." "Emily, your father, I know. He built you an empire." "He built me a safety net," Emily corrected. "That's what he called it, in the letter. He said he was not trying to build me a throne. He was trying to build me a net. Something to catch me if I fell. He built you a very large net," Carla said. Does Daniel know? Even a hint?" "No, Richard thinks I should keep it that way. Richard is a genius and I have never met him." Carla was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to meet with the estate attorney on Monday. I am going to meet with the divorce attorney before that. I am going to make sure everything is legally protected before Daniel's people start sniffing around." She paused. "And then I am going to figure out what comes next." "What about the baby?" Carla asked, and her voice was gentler now. "How are you doing?" "Not the legal stuff, you." Emily looked down at her belly. The morning light was different now. Less gray, more honest. "I am very sad," she said simply. "I loved him, Carla. I actually loved him. That's the part that's the hardest. It would be easier if I hadn't." "I know, baby, but I also..." She stopped, searched for the word. "I feel like my father's hands are still on my shoulders. Like he knew this was coming and he stayed up all night for years so that when it happened, I wouldn't be standing in the dark." Carla made a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely. "He was something else, Thomas Carter." "Thomas Alexander Whitmore," Emily said quietly. Another silence. "What?" Emily told her about the birth name. About the Whitmore family. About a 26-year-old man who had chosen love over a dynasty and walked away without looking back. "He chose your mother," Carla said softly. "He chose my mother. And then when she died, he chose me. Always," Carla said. "From the beginning to the end, always you." Emily felt the tears come again. She did not fight them this time. She let them fall quietly, the phone pressed to her ear, while her best friend stayed on the line and did not say anything at all, because sometimes the most loving thing is exactly that. Presence without words, the simple fact of someone being there. After a while, Carla said, "What do you need me to do? Can you come over tonight? I'll bring food. I'll stay as long as you want." "Carla," Emily wiped her face, "don't tell anyone. About the money, not Marcus, not yet, not anyone. You have my word. I need time to get everything in order before anyone knows. Once people know, it changes everything. It changes how they look at me. It changes what they want from me. I spent my whole life being Thomas Carter's daughter. Just his daughter. I need a little more time of being just that before I become something else." Carla was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Your father really did know who you were, didn't he? Down to the bone." Emily thought about the letter. The last few lines, "The inheritance that matters. The one nobody can take away." "He did," she said. "He always did." 3 days later, Emily sat across from the divorce attorney Richard had recommended. Her name was Patricia Wells, a woman in her 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the precise, unhurried demeanor of someone who had spent decades in rooms where enormous things were being decided and had learned never to be rattled by any of it. Patricia had read through the estate documents Richard provided. She had looked at Emily over the rim of her glasses once, then looked back at the documents, then looked up again with an expression that was professionally neutral but contained, somewhere behind it, the faintest trace of something that might have been satisfaction. "Your father was thorough," Patricia said. "He was," Emily agreed. He anticipated almost every contingency I can think of. She tapped a page. This structure, the way he set up the trusts and the legal firewalls, it is specifically designed to ensure that no marital claim can reach the inherited assets. In Illinois, inheritance is generally protected from marital claims anyway, but the fact that he documented the separation of funds so meticulously, going back decades, makes the position very clean. He was protecting me, Emily said. He was protecting you extraordinarily well, Patricia said. Now, tell me about Daniel. What does he earn? What assets do you share? They went through it methodically. Daniel's income as an investment executive. The apartment lease, which was in both names. The shared bank accounts, which contained, by the standards of what Emily now knew about her situation, a modest amount. A car in Daniel's name, some furniture, a vacation they had planned and never taken. He's going to expect a standard divorce settlement, Emily said. He thinks I'm a pregnant woman with no income living in an apartment we both pay for. He is going to be surprised, Patricia said simply. I don't want to weaponize it, Emily said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not trying to destroy him, I just want to be protected. I want to make sure that whatever he's entitled to, he gets, and whatever he's not entitled to is clearly not available. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Miss Carter, she said, in my experience, most people who say they do not want to weaponize their position are usually telling the truth. And I believe you are. But I want you to understand something. She folded her hands on the desk. Your job is not to be fair to Daniel. Your job is to protect yourself and your child. Fairness will come from the legal process. Your job is to make sure you are not so busy being the bigger person that you fail to show up for yourself. Emily held her gaze. My father said something similar in the letter. Your father sounds like he would have been an excellent client. Patricia picked up her pen. Now, when is he expecting to hear from you? He texted me about practical arrangements. I haven't responded. Good. Do not respond to anything directly. All communication goes through me now, okay? And Mrs. Carter, Patricia set the pen down again. Are you all right? Not legally. Personally. Emily thought about the question in the way she had been thinking about a lot of questions, turning them over, looking at them from multiple angles before answering. I'm grieving, she said honestly, two things at once. My father and my marriage. Some days I'm not sure which one is heavier. That's a fair thing to feel, Patricia said quietly. You are allowed to feel all of it. My father would say that grief is not a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that something mattered. Patricia looked at her for a moment. He really was something, wasn't he? He was everything, Emily said simply. She left the attorney's office and sat in her car in the parking garage for a few minutes before starting the engine. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed, and she breathed. In and out. Slow and even. The way her father used to breathe when he was fixing something complicated in the garage. Something that required patience, something that would not respond to being rushed. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Daniel again, this time a call, not a text. She watched the screen, let it ring, watched his name until it stopped. Then another buzz. A voicemail. She played it. His voice came through the speaker, and it was the voice she had been hearing 7 years. The voice she had fallen asleep to and woken up next to, and called from airports and argued with in grocery stores and heard say, I love you across so many ordinary moments that it had stopped feeling like a statement and started feeling like air. She had just breathed it in without thinking. Emily, he said, I know you're not ready to talk, and I understand that. I think we should try to handle this like adults. There's paperwork that needs to happen. There's the apartment. There's a lot to deal with. And I think the sooner we sit down and work through the practical stuff, the better it will be for both of us. For the baby, too. I'm not trying to make this harder. I just want to get to a place where we can both move forward. Call me when you're ready. She played the message twice. Practical forward, adults. The language of a man who had already grieved this privately on his own schedule and was now ready for the logistics. She deleted the voicemail. She started the car. As she pulled out of the parking garage into the afternoon suns, something occurred to her with the quiet force of a door, clicking open in a room she had never noticed before. Daniel was going to find out. Not today, not this week, but eventually, the world was going to reveal what Thomas Carter had left behind. The foundation Richard was already discussing, the legal transfer of assets. the profile that would inevitably begin to form in financial and philanthropic circles around the name Emily Carter. Daniel was going to find out. And when he did, every practical, forward, adult thing he had arranged for himself would look completely different in the new light. She thought about how he would feel. She examined the thought carefully, looking for something vengeful in herself, some satisfaction, some hunger for his discomfort. She did not find it. What she found instead was something much quieter, and in its own way, much more powerful. She found that she simply did not need him to suffer in order to be okay. That was her father's greatest gift, not the fortune, not the safety net, not the legal firewalls or the estate attorney or the portfolio that had been growing in the dark for 30 years. The greatest gift was this. She was standing on her own 2 feet in a parking garage in Chicago, 6 months pregnant, 2 days out of the worst conversation of her life, and she did not need anything from the man who had walked out of her kitchen to feel like herself. She was already herself. She had always been herself. Thomas Carter had made sure of it. She drove home through the afternoon traffic, through the ordinary noise of the city going about its business, and she thought about her daughter, because she had been thinking of the baby as a daughter for weeks now. Something she had not told Daniel because she had not been ready to share it, and she thought about the kind of woman she wanted this daughter to see when she looked at her mother. Not a victim, not a woman defined by what had been done to her. A woman who had been broken open by grief and betrayal and had found, in the breaking, that there was something inside her that did not break. Something her father had put there. Something that no amount of divorce papers could ever reach. She got home, she unlocked the door. She walked into the apartment. It still smelled like Daniel, a little, and she stood in the hallway for a moment and let herself feel that, the particular ache of a smell that used to mean safety and now just meant history. Then she walked to the kitchen. She filled a glass of water. She drank it slowly, and she picked up her phone and called Richard Hayes. "I'm ready," she said when he answered. "Let's start Monday." "I'll have everything prepared," he said. "One more thing," she said. "The foundation." He mentioned it in the letter, the Carter Legacy Foundation. He had already been thinking about it. He had more than thought about it, Richard said. He had begun the preliminary work. The legal skeleton exists. He just needed you to decide whether to build on it. She looked at the photograph of her father on the kitchen shelf. The one she had put there years ago, taken at a Sunday barbecue, him in a flannel shirt, laughing at something just outside the frame. The man in that photograph had been a secret billionaire who chose flannel shirts and Sunday barbecues because those were the things that were actually real. "Let's build on it," she said. The Monday morning meeting with the estate attorney lasted 4 hours. Emily sat across from a man named Gerald Foss, who was 70 years old and had the kind of stillness that comes from having handled the most complicated financial and legal arrangements of the wealthiest families in Illinois for 4 decades without ever once losing his composure. He shook Emily's hand when she came in, looked at her the way Richard Hayes had looked at her, with that particular expression that contained grief and something like reverence, and said simply, "Your father spoke of you often. It is an honor to meet you, even under these circumstances." She had heard variations of that sentence 3 times in the past week. Each time it landed differently. Each time, it reminded her that her father had lived 2 lives simultaneously, one that she had known entirely and one that she had not known at all, and that in both of those lives, she had been the most important person. Gerald walked her through the transfer process with the precision of a man who understood that the person across from was intelligent and deserved to have things explained completely rather than summarized into digestible pieces designed to prevent overwhelm. She appreciated that. She asked questions, he answered them. Richard sat beside her and occasionally added context, and the 3 of them worked through documents that represented 30 years of quiet, patient, deliberate construction. By the end of the meeting, the first phase of the transfer was underway. Emily Carter on paper was now something the world did not yet know about. She drove home and sat in the apartment and thought about that, about the gap between what was real and what was visible. Her father had lived inside that gap for 30 years. He had been the wealthiest person in every room he ever walked into and had never once allowed that fact to change how he stood or what he said or what he cared about. She was going to have to learn how to live inside that gap herself now. At least for a while, at least until she was ready. She was not ready yet, but she was getting there. Patricia Wells called that afternoon. Daniel's attorney has made contact, she said without preamble. His name is Greg Albright. He's competent, not exceptional. Daniel has retained him quickly, which tells me he had been thinking about this for some time, before he had the conversation with you. Emily absorbed that. He already had an attorney lined up. It appears so, yes. He planned it, she said. He planned all of it. It appears that way, Patricia said carefully. I want you to be aware of that without letting it derail you emotionally. Can you do that? I can try. Albright has submitted an initial filing. Standard dissolution. He's claiming irreconcilable differences, which is straightforward. He is also making a preliminary claim on shared assets, which is expected. The apartment contents, the joint account. He's keeping it modest, which is interesting. Interesting how? Emily said. It means either he genuinely believes you have nothing significant, or he is being strategically conservative while he gathers more information. Either way, my response will be equally measured. We are going to play this very quietly, Emily. We are going to give absolutely nothing away until the moment it becomes strategically necessary to do so. And when is that? When he tries to take something he is not entitled to, Patricia said simply. At that point, we will show our hand, and it will be a very interesting moment. Emily almost said, I'm not trying to make it dramatic. But she caught herself because she thought about her father and what he would say. He would say, Patricia is right. You protect what needs protecting. That is not cruelty, that is common sense. All right, Emily said. I trust you. Good, Patricia said, that's all I need. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks that were, on the surface, quiet. Emily went to her prenatal appointments. She reorganized the apartment in ways that felt like reclaiming it, moving furniture a few inches, clearing out half of a closet, buying a rug she had always liked but Daniel had said was too bold. She let Carla come over twice a week, and they would sit in the kitchen for hours, talking and not talking in equal measure, the way that women who have known each other for a long time know how to do. She called Richard every few days with questions. She read everything he sent her, every document, every summary, every financial statement, with the same careful attention her father had brought to everything he ever did. She was learning the language of the world her father had built. It was a complicated language, full of terms she had to look up and structures she had to trace on paper before they'd make sense. But she was learning it. She was a quick study. She had always been a quick study. Her father used to say she could understand anything if you gave her enough time and didn't talk down to her. And he had been right about that, the way he had been right about most things. On a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the funeral, Emily felt the first contraction. It was early. The baby was not due for 10 more weeks. She sat very still in the kitchen chair for a full 30 seconds, her hand pressed flat against her belly, listening to her body the way her father had to listen to old engines, carefully, without panic, because panic is just noise that drowns out information. The contraction passed. She called her doctor. Her doctor told her to come in immediately. She called Carla. I need you to drive me. Carla arrived in 11 minutes. She did not ask questions. She picked up Emily's bag, took her arm, and walked her out to the car with the quiet efficiency of someone who loves a person so much that in the moment of crisis, love becomes purely practical. In the car, Emily called Richard. She was not sure why exactly. The call her brain told her to make was to the doctor, which she had already made. The call her heart told her to make, the one she could not make because he was no longer there to answer, was to her father. Richard was the next closest thing to her father that she had. He was the person who had known Thomas Carter in the dimension of his life she was only beginning to understand. Calling Richard felt in some not entirely rational way like reaching toward her father. Richard answered immediately. Is everything all right? Early contraction, she said. I'm going to the hospital. I think it's probably fine, the doctor said, probably Braxton Hicks, but I wanted someone to know. I'm on my way, Richard said. You don't have to. I am already getting my coat, he said, and hung up. She spent 4 hours at the hospital. The contractions stopped. The baby was fine. The doctor told her she needed to reduce stress and get more sleep, which Emily noted with the specific tired amusement of woman who had been told to reduce stress while simultaneously navigating a grief, a divorce, and a secret inheritance. Richard arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after she did and sat in the waiting area the entire time. When she came out and saw him standing there, a man in his late 60s who had cleared his entire day to sit in his hospital waiting room. For a woman he had known for less than a month, she felt something open in her chest that she had not expected. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Your father would not have forgiven me if I hadn't," Richard said simply. He handed her a cup of tea. "He also would not have forgiven me if this tea is wrong. I guessed chamomile." She took the cup. "It's right." "Good, then I've done something right today." He walked beside her toward the exit. "How are you feeling? Tired?" she said honestly. "Scared in a way that doesn't go away, grateful, sad, all at the same time. That sounds about right for where you are," he said. "Richard." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Did he ever regret it, my father, walking away from the Whitmore family? Changing his name, giving up what he gave up?" She looked at the older man steadily. "Did he ever tell you he wished he had made a different choice?" Richard considered this with the seriousness it deserved, not rushing to a reassuring answer. "In 30 years, he said slowly, I had hundreds of conversations with your father. About money, about the markets, about strategy. And in that time he mentioned his family of origin perhaps 5 times. Not with anger, with a kind of finished quality. The way you mention something that is completely settled." He paused. "The only regret I ever heard him express was that your mother died young. That she did not have more time. That you did not have more time with her." He looked at Emily. He never once expressed regret about the choice he made. "I believe that choice was the foundation of everything else. And I believe he knew it." Emily nodded slowly, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "Okay," she said. Okay, what?" Richard asked. "Okay, I think I'm ready to start making some bigger decisions," she said. The Carter Legacy Foundation was not announced publicly for another 3 months. In those 3 months, Emily worked with Richard and a team of attorneys and nonprofit specialists to build what her father had sketched in the preliminary documents into something real and operational and true to his vision. She was involved in every decision. She attended every meeting. She asked so many questions that the spaces to look forward to her Tessup's questions because they forced the team to think more precisely about what they were building and why. She did not make decisions quickly. She made them carefully. The way her father fixed things in the garage, understanding the problem completely before reaching for a tool. The divorce proceedings continued in parallel in the background, handled by Patricia with the same methodical precision. Daniel had been, to his credit, or perhaps simply to his own sense of how things would go, cooperative on the surface. He responded to filings. He showed up for required meetings. He was, as he had promised Emily in that last voicemail she had deleted, adult about it. He also had no idea what was happening on the other side of the table. Emily knew that, Patricia knew that, Richard knew that, and none of them said anything, because there was nothing to say yet. The process moved forward. Documents were filed, responses were made. The shared apartment, which neither of them had been living in together for 2 months by this point, was resolved without drama. The joint accounts were divided fairly, not generously but fairly, because Emily was not trying to punish him, and Patricia had been clear that generosity served no legal purpose and could actually complicate the record. Daniel, throughout all of this, seemed to be operating under the assumption that he was dealing with the Emily he thought he had married. The woman without resources. The woman who needed the settlement to land well because she did not have anything else to fall back on. He was cooperative because he could afford to be cooperative. He had already arranged his future. He had Sophia. He had his career. He had the version of himself he had decided to become. Emily was a practical matter to close. He was so certain of all of this that he stopped paying close attention. That was his most significant mistake. Carla was at Emily's apartment on the evening the divorce was finalized. They were not celebrating exactly, but they were not grieving either. They were sitting at the kitchen table with takeout containers between them and the kind of conversation that moves around in the way that real conversations do, from heavy to light and back again. "He signed today," Emily said. "I know," Carla said. Patricia called Marcus. She didn't have to, but she did. "It's done," Emily said. Carla looked at her carefully. "How does it feel?" Emily thought about it. The way she had been thinking about things lately, turning them over, being honest with herself even when the honest answer was complicated. "It feels like a door closing," she said, "not a window opening. Just a door that needed to close. That's an honest answer. I'm trying to be honest these days, about everything. My father was honest. He was the most honest person I knew. Not brutally honest in the way people say when they mean they enjoy saying hard things. Quietly honest, he just told the truth all the time and expected it to be enough. Carla was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What happens now with the foundation, with all of it?" "The foundation goes public in 3 weeks," Emily said. "There's a gala, Richard organized it. Business leaders, investors, people who knew my father professionally, which was a different world from the world he let me see." She picked at her food. "It's going to be a formal introduction. Emily Carter, as the public will come to understand her, is going to be someone they have never heard of. And that is going to be strange. You're not nervous." "I'm terrified," Emily said simply, "but I keep thinking about what my father wrote in the letter. He said, 'You will know when you are ready, Emily,' because readiness is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward while the fear is still there." She looked at Carla. "I think I'm ready." "You are so ready," Carla said firmly. "You have been ready your whole life and didn't know it because you were living at half your capacity inside a marriage that was always going to be too small for you." Emily looked at her friend for a moment. "When did you know? About Daniel?" Carla was quiet for long enough that the answer was in the silence before she spoke. Early, she finally said, "I didn't say anything because I thought I was wrong. I thought maybe I just didn't like him enough to see him clearly. I thought my job was to support your choices, not second-guess them." She met Emily's eyes. "I should have said something." "No," Emily said, "I wouldn't have listened. Not then. I had to get here myself. My father knew that. He didn't say anything either, and he saw it, too. He just made sure that when I got here, I had somewhere solid to land." She touched her belly. The baby was moving, the long, slow rolls that had become familiar and comforting, a constant companion. "He always said the best thing you can do for someone you love is make sure they have options. That's all he ever gave me. Options." The night before the gala, Emily could not sleep again. But it was a different kind of sleeplessness from the kind she had known in the weeks after the funeral. That had been the sleeplessness of devastation, of lying in the rubble of a life and not knowing which piece to pick up first. This was something else. This was the sleeplessness of a woman who was standing at a door she had not opened yet, feeling the weight of what was on the other side. She got up and went to the kitchen. She made chamomile tea. She sat at the table. She called Richard at an hour that was inappropriate for calling anyone, and he answered on the Sessensen ring, which told her something about the kind of person he was. "Can't sleep," she said. "Neither can I, honestly," he said. "I've been looking at the program for tomorrow. It's going to be something, Emily. Your father would have been uncomfortable with the scale of it. He always hated fuss. He would have been in the back corner pretending to look at his phone," she said. Richard laughed, a real laugh, the first time she had heard him laugh without restraint. Exactly right, he absolutely would have. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Tell me something about him. Something I don't know. Something from the side of his life I didn't see." Richard was quiet for a moment, considering. "There was a company," he said. "About 15 years ago, a small logistics firm run by a man named Pete Gallagher. Pete had built it from nothing. It was struggling. He was going to have to let 40 people go, people who had families, mortgages, kids in school. He came to a meeting here, not to your father specifically. Pete didn't know your father was involved. He came to see about refinancing options." Richard paused. "Your father read the file. He called me that evening and said, 'Richard, what does it take to keep Pete Gallagher's company alive?' And I told him. And he provided it, quietly, through 3 layers of holding companies so Pete would never know where the money came from." Emily felt the warmth of the tea against her palms. "Did Pete ever find out?" "Your father died before Pete could find out," Richard said. "Pete Gallagher called me after the gala was announced, after your father's name became public in philanthropic circles. He had done some research, he found a thread, and he pulled it." A pause. "He called me in tears, 40 families, 15 years of a business that has now grown to 200 employees, because your father read a file and made a phone call on a Tuesday evening." Emily said nothing for a long moment. "He never told me," she finally said. "He never told anyone," Richard said. "That was the point." She thought about that, about a man who had been quietly holding up pieces of the world around him without requiring anything in return. Not recognition, not gratitude. Not a record of his goodness anywhere except in the lives of people who did not know he was responsible for them. "I want to do that," she said. "That's what I want the foundation to do. Not big public announcements, not naming rights on buildings. Actual help for actual people who are trying to build something real. Then that is what we will build, Richard said. He would approve for what it's worth. It's worth everything, she said. She went back to bed and slept for 5 hours, deeply without dreaming. She woke up and showered and stood in front of the mirror in the dress she had chosen for the gala, a deep navy that worked with her body the way good clothes do when you choose them for yourself, rather than for Hess Eskrelse's approval, and she looked at herself for a long moment. She was 8 months pregnant. She was a woman who had buried her father and been handed divorce papers in the same week. She was a woman who had sat alone in a kitchen at 3 a.m, reading a letter from a man who had loved her so much that he had reorganized his entire relationship with money to make sure she would always be free. She did not look like a woman who had been broken. She looked like a woman who had been through something and had not come out the other side unchanged, but had come out the other side. Carla arrived to pick her up at 6. She took one look at Emily standing in the doorway and put her hand over her mouth. "What?" Emily said. "Nothing," Carla said. "You just look like your father." Around the eyes, Emily smiled. It was the best thing anyone had said to her in months. The gala was held in a venue that Richard had selected with care, elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of room that her father would have tolerated if he had absolutely had to be there. The guest list was 200 people. Business leaders, philanthropists, journalists from financial publications, several politicians, people who operated in the dimension of the world her father had lived in, secretly, which Emily was now stepping into publicly for the first time. She arrived without announcement. She walked in through a side entrance with Richard beside her and Carla on her other side, and she stood at the edge of the room for a moment, taking it in. The room was already full. The sound of 200 people in conversation had a texture to it, a specific density that she could feel as much as hear. "You ready?" Richard said quietly. "Yes," she said. "He'd be so proud of you," Richard said. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens tonight, whatever the rest of this looks like, he would be so proud." She put her hand on his arm briefly. "I know," she said. "I can feel it." She was standing there at the edge of the room when she saw him. Daniel was across the room with Sophia Reed on his arm. She had known he would be there. The gala was a prominent event in Chicago's business community, and Daniel ran in those circles. Richard had told her Daniel had been on the attendee list and had offered to have him removed, and Emily had said no. She had meant it. She was not hiding from Daniel Brooks. She had nothing to hide from, but knowing he would be there and seeing him were two different things. He had not seen her yet. He was laughing at something Sophia said, his head tilted, that familiar posture she had known for 7 years. Sophia Reed was exactly what the name had always suggested in Emily's imagination. Beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who moved through rooms like she expected rooms to accommodate her. She was in a red dress and she had her hand through Daniel's arm and she was smiling. Emily looked at them for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. Not with pain, not with the sharp, breathless hurt she might have expected. With something closer to the feeling of completing an equation, all the variables now visible, the answer obvious. She understood now fully and completely what Daniel had chosen and why. He had wanted a particular life, a life with a specific shape. He had assessed the options available to him and made a calculated decision. That was who Daniel Brooks was underneath all the charm and the ambition and the pressed shirts. He was a man who optimized. He had optimized his way out of their marriage and into Sophia's orbit, and he had not once, she suspected, allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had done to a grieving pregnant woman, because feeling that weight would have been inefficient. She almost felt something like compassion for him. Almost Richard guided her to her table. The program began. There were speakers, tributes to her father's quiet legacy, business figures who had known Thomas Whitmore in his original life before he became Thomas Carter, people who described him in terms she had never heard, and which built a picture of a young man who had been formidable and brilliant and morally clear in a world that did not always reward moral clarity. She sat and listened to people describe her father, and she felt the grief and the love moving through her in waves, alternating like breathing. Then Richard took the stage. He spoke for 12 minutes. She knew what he was going to say because they had worked on the speech together. But hearing it in the room surrounded by 200 people was different from reading it on paper. He described Thomas Carter's life, the choice at 26, the walk away from the Whitmore name, the decades of quiet living. the equally quiet investment empire built not for display but for purpose. He described the Carter Legacy Foundation and its mission, helping single mothers, young entrepreneurs, struggling families, providing the kind of practical support that transforms options for people who have run out of them. And then he said her name, Thomas Carter's sole heir and the founder of the Carter Legacy Foundation, Emily Carter. The room turned, Daniel turned, and Emily stood up from her table and walked to the stage. She felt the room shift. She felt the particular quality of attention that a room gives to someone it has just decided to look at differently. The recalibration happening in real time, 200 people simultaneously updating an understanding they had walked in with and replacing it with something new. She did not look at Daniel. She stepped onto the stage. She stood at the podium. She looked out at the room. And then, across the distance of the ballroom, her eyes found him anyway. Not by intention, by some pull she could not explain and did not try to. Their eyes met for a moment, just a moment, across all those people and all that space and all that time. His face had gone completely still. She looked away first. Not because she was afraid of what she would see, because she had already seen everything she needed to. She looked at the room, she took a breath, and she spoke. "My father taught me," she said, "that the most powerful thing a person can do is choose who they want to be, every single day, regardless of what the world expects." He made that choice himself at 26 years old, standing in a room full of people who told him he was making a terrible mistake. He walked out of that room and never looked back. She paused. "I am my father's daughter. And tonight, this foundation, this work, this beginning, is the most complete way I know how to tell him that I understood." The applause began somewhere in the back of the room and moved forward like a wave. Daniel Brooks stood in the middle of it, not clapping, perfectly still, with the expression of a man who has just understood something that cannot be ununderstood. He had left a woman with nothing. The woman he had left was standing on a stage in front of 200 of the most influential people in Chicago, holding the legacy of a man who had quietly moved billions of dollars across 3 decades for the singular purpose of making sure she was always free. Emily Carter did not look back at him. She was already looking forward. The applause was still going when Emily stepped off the stage. Richard was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He did not say anything. He simply put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the way a person does when words would be smaller than the moment, and then he walked beside her back toward the table. Carla was already on her feet, eyes bright, pressing her lips together the way she always did when she was trying not to cry in public. "Don't," Emily said quietly as she reached her. "I'm not," Carla said and wiped her eye with one finger. "I'm absolutely not." Emily sat down. She accepted a glass of water from a server. She breathed. The room was still moving around her, the particular energy of a large gathering that has just witnessed something it did not expect, and the conversations happening at every table had a different quality now, a recalibrated hum, the sound of people updating their understanding of who Emily Carter was and what tonight actually meant. She did not look across the room to where Daniel was standing. She did not need to. She could feel with a precision that surprised her exactly what was happening over there. She had known Daniel Brooks for 7 years. She had learned to read the specific frequency of his discomfort, the way his jaw tightened and his shoulders pulled back when he encountered something that did not fit the narrative he had constructed. She did not need to see his face to know what was on it. What she did not expect was that he would cross the room. She was in a conversation with a woman named Dr. Ann Forrester, a pediatric specialist who, when she follows in the Foundation's stated mission with professional interest, when she felt the shift in the air just behind her left shoulder. The specific shift that a body makes when someone it knows well is suddenly close. She turned. Daniel was standing 3 feet away. He was alone. Sophia was not with him. He had crossed the room by himself, which told Emily something, though she was not yet sure what. He was wearing an expression she had seen on him before, but rarely, the expression of a man who has been wrong about some significant and is standing inside the wrongness trying to figure out how to breathe. "Emily," he said. Dr. Forrester looked between them with the polite attentiveness of a woman who understood immediately that she was suddenly in the middle of something private. "Excuse me a moment," Emily said to her, and the doctor nodded and moved away with graceful efficiency. Emily looked at Daniel. She waited. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was lower than his normal register, quieter. The prepared quality she remembered from the kitchen table was completely gone. This was an unscripted Daniel. She had not seen one of those in a long time. About your father, about any of this, I had no idea. I know you didn't, she said. Emily, Daniel, she kept her voice even. Not cold, not warm, exactly level. What is it you want to say to me, specifically? Because if you've come over here to tell me you're sorry, I want to make sure you are clear on what exactly you're sorry for, because there are several options. He blinked. She had surprised him, she could see it. The Emily he was used to would have softened the edge of that sentence, would have given him the exit ramp he was looking for, before he even asked for it. She had spent 7 years doing that, smoothing his path, translating his discomfort into something manageable. She was not doing that anymore. I made a mistake, he said. Which one? Another blink. Emily, I want to be very clear, she said, and her voice was still perfectly level, that this is not a conversation I am having here, in this room, at this event tonight. If you have something to say to me, you contact Patricia Wells. That is what she is there for. I don't want to talk to your attorney. I want to talk to you. That is not how this works anymore, Daniel. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that she recognized, and she felt the old pull of it, the old reflex to respond to his discomfort by offering comfort, the habit of 7 years pressing against the decision of the past several months. She felt it and she held it steady and she did not move. You're different, he said finally. Yes, she agreed. I mean, you seem, I don't know, different. I became someone you didn't leave room for, she said simply. Good night, Daniel. She turned back to the room, her heart was hammering. She kept her face entirely still. She reached for her water glass and her hand was steady, and she was grateful for that, grateful with the specific gratitude of a woman who has done the work to earn steadiness. Carla materialized at her elbow within 30 seconds. What did he say? He said he didn't know, Emily said. About my father, about all of it, and he said he made a mistake. Carla looked at her. What did you say? I told him to contact Patricia. Carla stared at her for a moment. Then she said, your father would absolutely love who you are right now. Emily looked across the room. Daniel was walking back to where Sophia was standing. Sophia was watching him return with an expression that Emily could read from 40 feet away. Not confusion, something sharper than that. The expression of a woman who has just watched her partner walk across a room toward his ex-wife and come back looking like he'd been quietly dismantled. Emily looked away. She went back to the conversation with Dr. Forrester, who reappeared at her elbow with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades navigating social situations that required both sensitivity and forward momentum. They talked about the Foundation's maternal health initiatives for 20 minutes. It was a good conversation, a real one, the kind that moved ideas forward. That was what Emily focused on for the rest of the evening. Not Daniel, not Sophia, not the version of her life that was behind her. The conversations in front of her. The people who had come tonight because they believed in what her father had built and what she was committing to continue. She drove home with Carla at 11:30. The baby was very active, rolling and pushing in the way she had come to understand as her daughter's response to stimulation, to big rooms and music and the vibration of many voices. She had decided definitively by now that it was a daughter. She had not confirmed it with a doctor because she wanted to wait, wanted that one surprise to stay intact in a season where so many things had been exposed all at once. But she knew, she simply knew, dinner tomorrow. Carla said as Emily got out of the car. Yes, Emily said, bring Marcus, I want normal tomorrow. Just dinner and your husband talking too much about whatever sport is currently happening. Carla laughed. He will absolutely do that. Emily went inside. She moved through the apartment that was now entirely hers, the apartment she had reorganized and reclaimed inch by inch over the past months, and she went to the kitchen and made tea and stood at the counter and looked at the photograph of her father on the shelf. I did it, she said to the photograph. I showed up. The photograph showed him laughing. She had always loved that photograph because it was so completely him. The laugh that came all the way from somewhere real, the kind of laugh that could not be performed. She pressed her hand against her belly. Your grandfather was something else, she said to her daughter. You are going to learn about him. I'm going to make sure of it. She went to bed, she slept. The next morning her phone rang at 7:45. Patricia Wells. I heard it went well, Patricia said. It was a good evening, Emily said. Daniel Brooks contacted my office this morning, Patricia said, and her voice had a quality to it, not quite amusement, not quite satisfaction, but something adjacent to both. His attorney called at 7:15. Albright. He said Daniel would like to revisit the terms of the settlement. Emily sat up straighter. The settlement is finalized. Technically it is not, Patricia said carefully. There are outstanding items. We intentionally left certain things open, as you recall, because the timing of the asset transfers meant we needed flexibility on our end. That flexibility has now been interpreted by Daniel's team as an opportunity. What does he want? He hasn't been specific yet. Albright asked for a meeting. I said I would consult with you. A pause. My professional recommendation is that we take the meeting. We let him show his hand and then we respond. Emily was quiet for a moment. He saw the gala coverage, she said. It was not a question. There was significant press, Patricia confirmed. The Chicago Business Journal ran a piece this morning. Your father's story is remarkable, Emily. Journalists are going to find it remarkable for quite a while. Emily thought about Daniel reading the coverage. She thought about him sitting wherever he sat in his new life with Sophia, scrolling through an article about the Carter Legacy Foundation and the Whitmore fortune and the daughter of a secret billionaire who had been living as a maintenance worker, and she thought about the particular quality of that realization, landing on a man who had handed that same woman divorce papers 24 hours after her father's funeral. Set up the meeting, Emily said, but Patricia, I want to be there. A pause. I don't typically recommend clients attend directly. I know, I want to be there anyway. Another pause, longer this time. All right, Patricia said. I'll arrange it. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. Emily arrived at Patricia's office 10 minutes early and was already seated when Daniel and his attorney walked in. Greg Albright was exactly what Patricia had described. Competent, not exceptional. A man in his mid-50s who wore the particular brand of polished confidence that came from winning enough cases to believe he was better in the room than he usually was. He shook Patricia's hand with practiced warmth. He glanced at Emily and his composure flickered for just a fraction of a second because he had not expected her to be there, and that fraction of a second told Emily everything she needed to know about how they had prepared for this meeting. Daniel sat across from her at the conference table. He was wearing the slate blue shirt again. She noticed this and then let it go. Albright began with pleasantries that nobody in the room required. Patricia let him finish and then said, with the efficient warmth of a surgeon making the first cut, perhaps you can tell us specifically what it is you'd like to discuss. Albright set a folder on the table. Our client feels that the current settlement structure, given recently disclosed information about the Carter estate, does not accurately reflect the shared marital context in which certain financial decisions were made. We believe there may be grounds for revisiting the division in light of. Stop, Patricia said pleasantly. Let me help us be efficient here. You are suggesting that because Emily's inheritance has become publicly known, Daniel is entitled to a larger share of the settlement. Is that the argument? Albright adjusted his jacket. We believe the shared marital years represent a contribution that was not fully valued in the original. The inheritance is protected under Illinois statute and additionally protected by extraordinary legal architecture put in place by Thomas Carter, specifically to prevent this kind of claim, Patricia said. Her voice did not change in temperature at any point. It was the same throughout, even, pleasant, and about as yielding as bedrock. Every dollar in the Carter estate was inherited, not earned during the marriage, and is documented as such with a 30-year paper trail. There is nothing to revisit. Albright opened the folder. We have identified certain instances where marital funds and estate-adjacent funds may have been. They weren't, Patricia said. A pause. I'm sorry? Whatever instances you believe you've identified, they weren't. I have had 3 forensic accountants review every transaction in every account connected to Emily Carter for the past 7 years. The separation is complete and documented. You will not find a thread to pull. She closed her own folder. I'd encourage you, professionally, not to spend your client's money pursuing this. The room was quiet. Daniel had not spoken once. Emily had been watching him the way her father used to watch things, quietly, with full attention, without giving anything away. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set, and the particular expression of a man who had convinced himself he was walking into a room with leverage and has just understood that he is not. Then he looked directly at her. Emily, he said. She held his gaze. Daniel, I'm not trying to take something that isn't mine, he said, and she could hear, underneath the rehearsed quality of it, something real. Something that caused him to say, I didn't understand. What your father had. What you were dealing with, I didn't know. You didn't know because it wasn't your information to have, she said quietly. My father's life was his to share or not share. He chose not to share it. That was his right. But if you had known, she said, and her voice was still completely steady, what would have been different, Daniel? Specifically, what would you have done differently? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because the answer to that question, honest and direct, was not one he could say in this room with both attorneys present and with Emily looking at him the way she was looking at him. The honest answer was that what would have been different was the calculation, the optimization. He would have run different numbers and arrived at a different conclusion. And they both knew it. This meeting is concluded, Patricia said, pleasantly and absolutely finally. Greg, if you identify any legitimate legal basis for a revised claim, I look forward to reviewing the documentation. Until then, I think we're done here. Albright gathered his folder. He said something professionally neutral about following up. He and Daniel stood. Daniel looked at Emily one more time as he rose from the chair, and she saw it then, briefly, the thing she had been waiting to see because she had known it would come eventually. Not regret about the divorce, deeper than that. Regret about who he had been. The particular regret of a person who has looked into a mirror that did not show them what they expected, and cannot now look away from what they saw. She did not hold on to his gaze. She looked at Patricia. Are we done? We are completely done, Patricia confirmed. Emily nodded and reached for her bag. She walked out of the building into the October air, sharp and clear, the same quality of October air that had been at her father's funeral almost 5 months ago, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she did not recognize. She almost did not open it, then she did, Miss Carter. My name is Pete Gallagher. I don't know if Richard Hayes told you about me. I want to find a way to thank your family for what your father did for mine. If you're ever willing to talk, I would be honored. She stood on the sidewalk reading the text twice. Pete Gallagher. The logistics company, 40 families, 200 employees now. 15 years of a business that existed because her father had read a file on a Tuesday evening and made a phone call. She typed back, Mr. Gallagher, Richard mentioned you. I would very much like to talk. Call whenever you're ready. She put the phone in her bag and walked to her car. 2 weeks later, Pete Gallagher sat across from Emily in the foundation's new offices. He was a man in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with the hands of someone who had built things physically before he built them financially. And he had the specific quality of someone who has spent a long time trying to figure out how to express something enormous and has not yet found words big enough. He told her the story as he understood it, how the company had been on the edge, how he had gone looking for refinancing and come back with it and never fully understood where it had come from. How he had spent 15 years building something he was proud of, something that gave good work to good people, and how he had always had the uneasy sense that he owed a debt he could not identify. When the articles came out about your father, Pete said, about who he actually was and about the foundation, I started looking. I'm not a financial guy by instinct, I'm an operations guy, but I pulled the thread and it kept leading back. He stopped. Shook his head. He saved my company. He did it anonymously. He never asked for anything in return, not equity, not acknowledgement, not even a phone call. He looked at Emily directly. Why would a man do that? Emily looked at him for a moment. Because he believed that a business built by someone who genuinely wanted to build it was worth more to the world than a failed business that might have been saved for the wrong reasons, she said. He believed in the person, not the transaction. Pete looked at her for a long moment. He must have been something, he said quietly. He was, she said. I'd like to be involved, Pete said, with the foundation. Whatever that looks like. I don't mean financially, though I'd like to contribute that way too if it's appropriate. I mean actually involved. I know what it looks like when a business is about to go under, and the person running it is the right person to save it. I know how to see that. Your father saw it once when I needed it. I'd like to help the foundation see it for other people. Emily looked at him steadily. We are building an advisory panel, she said. People who understand what real businesses look like from the inside. Not from a boardroom, from the floor. I know the floor, Pete said. I've spent 30 years on it. Then I'd like you to be part of what we're building, Emily said. He nodded. His expression was the expression of a person settling a debt they have been carrying. For a very long time, the particular relief of a weight finally put down in the right place. After he left, Emily sat alone in the office for a while. The office was still new enough to smell like fresh paint and recently unpacked books. The photograph of her father that she had chosen for the foundation, the same one from the kitchen shelf, the one where he was laughing, had been enlarged and framed and hung on the wall opposite the door so that it was the first thing anyone saw when they walked in. She looked at it now. "Pete Gallagher came by today," she said. "He's going to help us find the right people to save." She almost expected the laugh. She had been doing that lately, talking to him in the empty office in the mornings before the staff arrived, because it felt more honest than talking to a photograph in silence. Her therapist, a woman she had started seeing in her 5th month of pregnancy and continued seeing now, said that was a healthy expression of ongoing grief and connection. Emily appreciated the clinical permission but would have done it anyway. 3 days after the meeting with Pete Gallagher, Carla called her at 8 in the morning, which was unusual that Emily answered immediately. "Have you seen the news?" Carla said. "I just woke up." Sophia Reed's company, Carla said. The social media platform. "It's been all over the financial news this morning. There was an investor scandal. I'm not clear on all the details, but it's not good, Em. It looks..." Emily was quiet. The kind of serious where people use words like SEC and investigation in the same sentence, Carla said. I don't want to be the person who calls with gossip about your ex-husband's situation. I'm calling because I thought you should know before you hear it somewhere else." "I appreciate that," Emily said. "Are you okay?" Emily thought about the question. She stood in her kitchen with the phone to her ear and thought about Sophia Reed, a woman she had never met but whose name had reorganized Emily's entire life. She thought about Daniel, who had optimized his way toward what he believed was a better future, and had arrived somewhere he had not anticipated. "I'm not glad," she said slowly. "I want to be honest about that. I'm not glad something bad is happening to them. That's not what this feels like." "What does it feel like?" "It feels like watching something that was always going to land somewhere land," she said. "My father used to say that choices have a weight to them. They don't always come due immediately. Sometimes they travel. But they always arrive somewhere." Carla was quiet for a moment. "You really are his daughter, aren't you?" "I'm trying to be," Emily said. The Sophia Reed situation unfolded over the following weeks, and these things do in the age of financial journalism in pieces. Each piece is revealing a more complicated picture than the one before it. The social media platform had been built on representations to investors that did not match the underlying metrics. It was not a simple story. There were layers of accounting decisions and communication strategies that various peoples would spend months arguing about in legal filings. But the broad shape of it was clear early. Sophia Reed had built something that looked more impressive from the outside than it was on the inside, and people who had trusted that outside view had lost significant money. Daniel's name appeared in the coverage not as a central figure, as a peripheral one. He had made several introductions between Sophia's company and his professional network, connections he had presumably made while he was still married to Emily, and building what he imagined was his future. The introductions were legal. His role was not under investigation. But his name was in the articles, and in the world of investment and finance, being adjacent to an SEC inquiry, even peripherally and innocently, was the kind of thing that had a long tail. Emily read the articles once each carefully and then put them aside. She had work to do. The foundation had received 240 applications in its first month of accepting them. Single mothers trying to keep businesses alive. Young entrepreneurs who had real ideas and no access to the rooms where real ideas got funded. Families in crisis who needed a specific targeted intervention to keep them from losing everything to one bad year. Emily read every application herself, every single one. Her staff urged her to let the review committee handle the initial screening, and she did, but she also read everyone that came to her desk. Her father had read Pete Gallagher's file on a Tuesday evening. She was going to read these files too. She was in the office late on a Thursday, in her 7th month of pregnancy and entirely too large to be comfortable in an office chair for long stretches, working through a stack of applications, when Richard knocked on the open door and came in. "You should go home," he said. "I have 12 more," she said without looking up. "They will be here tomorrow." "So will I," she looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his coat already on, which meant he was leaving and had stopped to check on her before he did. "Richard, sit down for a minute," he sat across from her. His expression shifted into the listening posture she had come to recognize. "I want to tell you something and I want you to just hear it," she said. "I've been thinking about it for a while and I want to say it out loud." "All right. I know what he was protecting me from," she said. "My father, I know now. I thought for a long time that he was protecting me from poverty, from dependence, from being trapped. And he was. But that wasn't the deepest layer of it." She looked at the photograph on the wall. "He was protecting me from the version of myself that would have been afraid. The version that would have stayed in the wrong situation because leaving felt impossible. The version that would have made herself smaller and smaller to fit into a life that was too tight." She looked back at Richard. The money was never the protection. The knowledge that I had options was the protection. He wanted me to know, in some part of myself, even if I never looked at the numbers, that I was never without a way out. Richard was quiet for a long moment. "He said something to me once," he said. "Years ago," he said, "Richard, the most dangerous thing that happens to good people is that they stop believing they deserve more than what they have been." He meant it about money, but he meant it about everything. He paused. "I think he always knew, somehow, that you might need to remember that." Emily nodded slowly. "I needed to remember it," she said. "I'd forgotten." "You've remembered now," Richard said. "Yes," she said, "I have." He stood up. He picked up his coat. He looked at her once more, at this woman who had come into his office 5 months ago, with a sealed envelope in her hand and a world that had just broken in half, and the expression on his face was not grief anymore. It was something warmer than that. 12 more applications," he said. "Then go home." 12 more, she agreed, then home. He left. She picked up the next application. She read it. It was a woman in her 40s, a single mother of 3, who had built a catering business over 8 years and was 6 weeks away from losing it to an equipment failure she could not afford to repair. The application was 3 pages long. The 3rd page was a letter, written by hand, that described what the business meant. Not in financial terms. In terms of what it felt like to have built something, to have fed people, to have given her children an example of what it looked like to make something from nothing. Emily read the letter twice. Then she picked up her pen and wrote at the top of the application, in her own handwriting, the same deliberate, careful handwriting she had inherited from a man who once wrote 4 pages front and back to his daughter, because he wanted to make sure she understood, approved. Full equipment grant, follow up directly. She moved to the next one. Outside the office window, Chicago moved through its Thursday evening the way it always did, indifferent and relentless and full of people carrying their private weights through the ordinary dark. Emily Carter sat inside that dark, reading the stories of people who needed what her father had spent 30 years building, and she did the work. She was her father's daughter. That had always been the most important thing about her. Anna Carter was born on a Thursday morning in December, 7 weeks after the gala, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, in the same city where her grandfather had chosen to become someone new. She arrived fast and loud, the way Emily had been told second labors sometimes did, except this was her first, and the doctor had laughed and said some babies simply know their own mind from the beginning. Emily held her daughter for the first time and felt something she did not have a word for yet, something beyond love, beyond relief, beyond the particular exhaustion of a body that has just done the hardest physical thing it has ever done. It was more like recognition, like looking at someone you have not met yet and understanding immediately that this person is going to change every calculation you have ever made about what matters. Anna had her grandfather's eyes, dark and still and paying complete attention to everything. Carla cried, the nurse cried. Richard, who had arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after Emily called him, sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, and when Emily's nurse came out and told him it was a girl and both were healthy, he pressed both hands over his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a long moment before he trusted himself to speak. When they let him in to see them, he stood at the edge of the room. This man in his late 60s who had known Thomas Carter for 30 years and had spent the last several months becoming, quietly and without any formal arrangement, the closest thing to a grandfather figure that Emily's daughter would have outside of a photograph on a wall. He looked at Anna, he looked at Emily, he said, "She has his eyes." "I know," Emily said. "He would have been undone by her," Richard said. "Completely undone, in the best possible way." Emily looked down at her daughter. "I know that too. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days. She slept in broken pieces between feedings and checks, and in the dark hours of the first night, with Anna sleeping against her chest, She talked to her daughter the way she had been talking to her for months, quietly, conversationally, as if they had already been friends for a long time and were just catching up. She told her about Thomas Carter, not the fortune, not the legal structures or the investment portfolio or the 30 years of strategic patience. She told her about the lunch pail and the old car and the flannel shirt and the Sunday barbecues and the laugh that came from somewhere completely real. She told her about a man who had been offered a dynasty and had chosen a kitchen table instead because the kitchen table had love at it and the dynasty did not. "You are named for the month he died," she whispered to her daughter in the dark. "Not exactly, Anna, not autumn, but close enough that every time I say your name I'll remember what that month gave me. It took him and it gave me everything he had been keeping safe for me. That felt like something worth honoring." Anna slept through all of it with the complete trust of a person who has not yet learned that trust is something you can lose. Emily came home from the hospital on a Saturday. Carla had been at the apartment, had stocked the refrigerator and put fresh flowers in the kitchen and arranged the small room that had been prepared for months with a precision that made Emily stand in the doorway and press her lips together because the kindness of it was almost too much. "I didn't do much," Carla said quickly, "just the basics. Carla, I might have also alphabetized the baby books. But that was just because I had time and Carla," Emily said again. "Thank you." Carla looked at Anna, asleep in the carrier against Emily's chest. "She is unbelievably beautiful," she said softly. "She looks like him," Emily said. "She looks like both of you," Carla said. "She's got your chin and his eyes, and she is going to absolutely run everything she touches, I can already tell." Emily smiled. It was the first fully relaxed smile she had smiled in months. She could feel the difference, the way it reached places that the other smiles, the composed ones, the steady ones, the ones she had maintained through meetings and galas and attorneys' offices, had not quite reached. She sat down on the couch. She let Carla make tea. She sat with her daughter sleeping against her, and she looked at the photograph of her father on the shelf, and for the first time since October, she did not feel the absence of him as primarily a wound. She felt it as a presence, as something that had not gone but had changed shape. He was in this room. He was in the child sleeping against her chest. He was in the foundation offices 3 miles away, where 22 applications were waiting to be reviewed on Monday morning. He was in the 57 families who had already received grants in the foundation's first 2 months of operation. He was in Pete Gallagher's 200 employees who went to work every day in a company that existed because Thomas Carter had any reason to believe in himself. He was everywhere his choices had touched. He was not gone. He had simply finished one form and moved into another. Emily understood that on a Saturday morning in December, sitting on her couch with her daughter and her best friend and a cup of chamomile tea, and the understanding did not take the grief away, but it changed its quality. It became something she could carry without putting down everything else. 6 weeks later, she went back to work, not full days immediately. Mornings at first, then gradually more, with Anna in a bassinet beside her desk. Foundation office for the first months because Emily was not willing to be separated from her daughter for full working days yet, and also because she had decided, in the particular clear-eyed way that becoming a mother had accelerated in her, that she would not pretend to be two separate people. She was a mother and she was the director of this foundation, and those two things were not in conflict. If anything, being Anna's mother made her better at the work. It sharpened her understanding of what was actually at stake in every application that landed on her desk. The staff adjusted without drama. Her operations director, a woman in her 40s named Grace, who had spent 15 years running a nonprofit in Detroit before Emily recruited her, simply moved the morning meeting 15 minutes later to accommodate feeding schedules and did not comment on it. That was the culture Emily was building, quietly, without announcements, by making decisions and living inside them. The foundation's second quarter saw 312 applications. The advisory panel, which now included Pete Gallagher and 4 other people with specific practical expertise in areas where the foundation was most active, had developed a review process that was rigorous without being cold. Every applicant received a response. Every declined application included specific feedback. Emily had insisted on that. Her father had once told her that the most disrespectful thing you can do to someone who has been brave enough to ask for help is ignore them. You respond. You tell them clearly. You give something they can use, even if what you're giving them is not what they asked for. She was 5 months into the foundation's public operation when Daniel called. Not through Patricia, not through Albright, directly. On a Tuesday morning while Emily was at her desk and Anna was sleeping in the bassinet beside her. She looked at his name on her phone screen for a long moment. Then she answered because she had made a decision early on that she was not going to be the kind of person who avoided things. Her father had not avoided things, he had simply chosen which things to engage with and how. Emily, Daniel said. Daniel, she said, a pause. She could hear him gathering himself. I'm not calling about the settlement, he said. I want to be clear about that from the start. There's nothing legal. This isn't that. All right, she said. What is it? Another pause, longer she waited. She had gotten very good at waiting. It was one of the things she had inherited from her father without knowing it, the ability to be comfortable in the silence while someone else organized their thoughts. I owe you an apology, he said, a real one. Not the kind I tried to give you at the gala, which was, I know what that was. I know it was about the money. I know you knew it was about the money. His voice was lower than his normal register. She recognized the texture of it from the conference room, that unscripted quality, that absence of the prepared surface. But that's not what I'm calling about now. I'm calling about the morning after your father's funeral. The kitchen table, the papers, a pause. I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not what I lost, what I did. Emily was quiet. You were 6 months pregnant, he said. You had buried your father the day before, and I sat across from you and I made it about my needs. About my timeline, about what I had decided I wanted. She heard him breathe. I have been thinking about that morning every single day since the gala. What your father built for you. What he knew about me that I didn't even know about myself. And I keep coming back to that morning in the kitchen and thinking about who I was in that moment. A pause. I'm sorry, Emily. For that morning specifically, that's what I called to say. She sat with his words for a long moment. Anna stirred in the bassinet and settled again. Outside the office window, Chicago moved through its Tuesday. I believe you, she said finally. I do. I think you mean it. I think you are genuinely sorry for how you handled that morning. She paused. I also think you are a man who made a series of choices over a long period of time that led to that morning. The morning was just the last choice in a chain. And I think you are probably starting to understand that now. He was quiet. I don't hate you, Daniel, she said. I want to be honest about that because I think you might be expecting me to and I don't. I did for a while, not a consuming hatred, more like a low, sustained anger that I had to work through deliberately. She looked at Anna. But I have a daughter now, and I have work that matters. And I have a life that my father spent 30 years building the foundation for, and I am not willing to spend any of it maintaining an anger at someone who is no longer part of my daily experience. How is she? He said, and his voice was quieter still. The baby, her name is Anna, Emily said. She has her grandfather's eyes. She is remarkable, I'm glad, he said. I mean that. I know, she said. Another pause. Then he said, I heard about the foundation. The work you're doing. I read about the catering woman. The equipment grant. He had been following the foundation's coverage. She filed that information away without reaction. Maria Chen, Emily said. Her company is fully operational. She hired 2 more people last month. Your father would have, yes, Emily said simply. He would have. The pause that followed was the longest one. Then Daniel said, I hope you're well, Emily. I genuinely do. I am, she said. I genuinely am. She ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of the office. She thought about what she felt. She checked herself carefully. Honestly, the way she had learned to do in the past months, looking for things she might be performing rather than feeling. She did not find anger. She did not find satisfaction. She found something simpler and more durable than either of those things. She found that she was okay, that she was more than okay, that the call had come and gone, and she was still exactly where she had been before it, sitting at her desk with her daughter, sleeping beside her, and 53 applications waiting to be reviewed, and a life that was entirely, completely without qualification her own. She picked up the next application. The twist that nobody had seen coming arrived on a Wednesday morning in March, 5 months after Anna was born. It came in the form of a letter, not an email. An actual letter on formal stationery delivered to the foundation offices by a courier who required a signature. The return address was a law firm in Boston that Emily had never heard of. The name at the top of the letterhead was Whitmore, Aldrich and Crane. She opened it at her desk with her letter opener, the silver one that had been her father's. the one Richard had brought her from the personal effects, along with a few other small things from Thomas Carter's apartment. She read the letter once. She set it down, she read it again. Then she called Richard. "Are you sitting down?" she said when he answered. "I'm standing," he said. "Should I sit?" "Yes," she said. She heard him sit, all right. "I received a letter this morning from a firm called Whitmore, Aldrich and Crane in Boston," she said. "It is from the surviving members of the Whitmore family. My father's family. The people he left when he was 26 years old." She looked at the letter on her desk. "They want a meeting." Silence on the other end. "Richard," she said. "I'm here," he said. "I'm processing. They know who I am," she said. "They've known about the Carter Legacy Foundation since the gala coverage. They apparently retained a genealogist who confirmed the connection. The letter is very formal and very careful, but the core of it is clear. They are the Whitmore family. I am Thomas Whitmore's daughter. And they want to sit down with me." "What do they want?" Richard said carefully. The letter doesn't say explicitly. It uses language about family connections and shared legacy and honoring Thomas's memory. She paused. "But Richard, these are the people who told my father he was nothing without their name. Who cut him off completely when he chose my mother over their business arrangement. Who let him walk away and apparently never tried to find him. Until now," Richard said, "when his story has become public and his daughter has become a recognizable figure in philanthropic circles. Until now," Emily confirmed. Richard was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" Emily looked at the letter. She looked at the photograph of her father on the wall. The one where he was laughing. She thought about a 26-year-old man standing in a room full of people who told him he was making a terrible mistake and walking out and never looking back. She thought about the choice that cost him everything and gave him everything that actually mattered. She thought about who she was. "I'm going to meet with them," she said. "Emily, I'm going to meet with them," she said again more firmly. "Not because they deserve a meeting, not because I owe them anything, but because my father chose to leave quietly, and I am choosing to engage clearly. Those are different things, and I think the difference matters." Richard was quiet. "What will you say to them?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know how I'll say it." The meeting was arranged for 3 weeks later. Emily flew to Boston. She brought Richard and Patricia Wells, and she left Anna with Carla, who held the baby with the practiced competence of a woman who was clearly going to be the best godmother in the history of the institution. The Whitmore family's law offices were on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district that communicated at every level of its design and function that it had been built by people who expected to be taken seriously. Emily walked in with Richard on her left and Patricia on her right, and she felt as she stepped into the elevator a specific quality of clarity that she associated with the moments in the past months that had mattered most. The same clarity she had felt walking onto the gala stage. The same clarity she had felt in Patricia's conference room when Daniel's attorney opened his folder and she sat across from them without moving. There were 4 people waiting in the conference room. 3 attorneys and 1 Whitmore. His name was Edward Whitmore, and he was 63 years old, which meant he had been in his mid-20s when Thomas Whitmore walked out of that family. He had silver hair and the particular erect posture of old money, and he looked at Emily when she entered the room with an expression she could not immediately read. He stood, he extended his hand, she shook it, they sat. One of his attorneys opened the meeting with the careful language of people who have prepared very thoroughly for a conversation they are not entirely sure how to have. He spoke for several minutes about family connections and shared heritage and the significance of Thomas Carter's recently public legacy and the Whitmore family's long history in American business and philanthropy. Emily let him finish. Then she looked directly at Edward Whitmore and said, "I'd like to hear from you, not from your attorneys, if that's all right." Edward Whitmore looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. He glanced at his attorneys and then looked back at Emily. "All right," he said. He leaned forward. He folded his hands on the table, and she noticed the gesture because it was exactly what Daniel had done at the kitchen table. The posture of a person organizing themselves around a difficult thing they need to say. "Your father and I were close," he said. "When we were young, before everything happened. He was my cousin. We grew up spending summers together. He was the most capable person I knew at that age. Brilliant, clear-eyed. Funny, actually. People don't always know that about him. He was genuinely funny." A pause. "When he left, I was 24. I was not in a position to do anything about it. The family made decisions that I did not have the standing to challenge." He paused again. "I have regretted that for nearly 40 years." Emily held his gaze. "What are you asking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking for anything financial. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Your father's estate is yours. What he built is yours. We are not making any claims." He met her eyes directly. "I am asking whether there is any possibility of a relationship between the Whitmore family and Thomas Carter's daughter. Not a business relationship, a human one." He paused. "He was my family. You are his daughter. That means something to me, even if I lost the right to say so a long time ago." The room was very quiet. Emily looked at him for a long time. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about what he had written in the letter. She was thinking about what it meant to be the daughter of a man who had left cleanly and built something beautiful from the leaving. She was thinking about whether engaging with the people her father had walked away from was honoring him or complicating the clarity of what he had chosen. And then she thought about something else. She thought about a woman named Maria Chen, who had built a catering business for 8 years and almost lost it to an equipment failure, and who was now fully operational and hiring. She thought about Pete Gallagher and his 200 employees and the 15 years of a business that existed because someone had chosen connection over caution. She thought about her father quietly saving things and people without requiring anything in return. She thought about what it would mean to extend that same generosity, that same willingness to believe in people, to someone who was asking for a second chance. "I'm not ready to answer that today," she said. "I want to be honest with you. My father's choice to leave was his. I am not going to pretend it didn't happen or that the circumstances that caused it don't matter." She paused. "But I am also not my father's wounds. I am my father's daughter, which is a different thing. I will think about what you've said, and I will be in touch." Edward Whitmore nodded slowly. He looked like a man who has been given more than he expected and is trying not to show how much it matters. "That's more than I came here hoping for," he said quietly. She flew home to Chicago that evening. Anna was awake and hungry and completely indifferent to international family dynamics, which Emily found deeply and specifically comforting. She sat in the chair in Anna's room and fed her daughter and thought about the meeting and what she felt about it. And what she felt was this: she did not know yet what the right thing was. She was not going to rush to a conclusion. She was going to let it sit, the way her father let things sit, the way patient people let complicated things develop before they reach for them. Her father had walked away from that family with complete conviction. She honored that conviction. She also knew that she was not her father, that she was his daughter, a different person in a different time, with choices he had never had. She could afford to be curious where he had needed to be clean. She did not need to decide tonight. That was enough. The foundation marked its 1-year anniversary in November with a small gathering, not a gala, not a public event, but a dinner for the people who had been part of building it, and several of the grant recipients who had agreed to come and talk about what the past year had meant for them. Maria Chen came with her catering crew and brought food that made Carla close her eyes after the first bite and say, "I would like to be buried under this." Pete Gallagher came with 3 of his managers and spent 20 minutes in a corner talking shop with Grace, the operations director, with the focused enthusiasm of 2 people who have found a rare thing, someone else who understands the specific problems they think about. Richard came in a suit that was slightly more formal than the occasion required and looked around the room with the expression of a man watching something he is proud of existing in the world. Emily stood at the edge of the room and watched all of it. Anna was with a sitter for the evening, and Emily was aware of the specific frequency of her absence the way new mothers are, like a radio signal she was always half tuned to, even when the room was full of other things. She thought about where she had been 1 year ago, standing beside her father's grave with one hand on an umbrella and one hand on her belly, standing in a kitchen while a man who had already left sat across from her and told her he was leaving, standing in Richard's office looking at a number on a page that did not look real. She thought about all the versions of herself she had been in the past year and how each one had been necessary and how none of them had been, and how she was still becoming, still moving towards something she could see more clearly every day without yet being able to name it completely. Carla appeared at her elbow. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Emily said. "Narrow it down." Emily looked at the room. "At Pete Gallagher laughing at something," Grace said. At Maria Chen, watching one of her servers move through the space with the particular pride of someone who built something and gets to watch it work. At Richard standing near the door, teacup in hand, looking exactly like what he was, a man who loved the person this room was about and was grateful to be inside it. "I'm thinking about what my father said," she told Carla. "In the letter, he said wealth is not what you keep. It is what you use to help others." She looked at her best friend. "I think I finally understand what he meant, not theoretically. Actually, in my body," she paused. "He wasn't talking about money." Carla looked at her. "No?" "He was talking about everything," Emily said. "Strength, experience, wisdom, the things that happen to you. You can keep them, carry them around, let them become the story you tell about yourself. Or you can use them, turn them into something that reaches past you." She looked at the room again. "He used everything he went through to make sure I was free. I want to use everything I went through to make sure other people have more options than they started with." She paused. "That's the inheritance. That's the actual thing he left me." Carla was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need you to know that Thomas Carter would be completely speechless right now." Emily smiled, the full smile again, the one that reached everywhere. "He would also be in the corner pretending to look at his phone." "Absolutely," Carla said, 100%. The dinner went late. Emily talked to everyone. She listened more than she talked, the way she had been learning to listen since the day she first sat across from Richard in that office and understood that there was a whole dimension of her father's life she had never been given access to. She listened to Maria Chen talk about the moment she realized her business was going to survive. She listened to a young man named Devin, 23 years old, who had received a seed grant for a community tech training program, talk about the first class he ran and how one of his students had just gotten a job at a company that would have seemed completely out of reach 6 months ago. She listened to Pete Gallagher talk about what it had meant to finally understand where the help had come from 15 years ago, and to be sitting in a room honoring the person responsible for it. At the end of the evening, when most people had gone and the room was quieting down, Richard found her near the window. "How are you?" he said. "I'm good," she said, "really good. The kind that doesn't need a qualifier." He looked at her for a moment with that expression. She had first struggled to categorize the day she walked into his office with a sealed envelope in her hand. She understood it now. It was what love looked like when it had been maintained through a long time and a great deal of loss, besets, and had come out this other side still intact. "He knew," Richard said, "from the very beginning. He knew exactly who you were going to be." Emily looked at the photograph of her father she had brought and placed on a table near the entrance. The same one, the flannel shirt, and the full laugh and the eyes that were now looking at her from her daughter's face every morning. "He gave me every tool I needed," she said, "and then he stayed out of the way and let me build." "That is exactly what he did," Richard said. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. "I miss him every day," she said. "That part doesn't change." "I don't think it's supposed to." "No," Richard said quietly. "I don't think it is." She drove home that night through a Chicago that was moving into its second winter since all of this began. Anna was asleep when she arrived, small and absolute and completely sure of herself even in sleep. The way babies are before the world has had a chance to introduce doubt. Emily stood over the crib for a long time in the dark, the way parents do, watching the breathing, watching the small chest rise and fall, watching the hands curl and uncurl in whatever dream was passing through. "Your grandfather built you a world," she whispered to her daughter. "I am going to spend my life making sure you know what kind of man he was. Not the money. The man, the choice he made at 26. The way he fixed broken things instead of replacing them. The way he laughed, the way he loved." She paused. "And I am going to make sure that whatever you face, whatever comes at you, you will never, not for one single moment of your life, doubt that you have options. That is the promise, that is the inheritance, that is everything." Anna breathed in the dark. The city moved outside the window. And Emily Carter, daughter of Thomas Carter, daughter of Thomas Alexander Whitmore, founder of the Carter Legacy Foundation, divorced, 30 years old, mother of a girl with her grandfather's eyes, stood in the quiet of a life she had built from the wreckage of the year that broke everything and remade her completely. And she understood, fully and finally, what her father had been trying to tell her from the beginning. The greatest thing a person can leave behind is not a fortune. It is the knowledge, planted deep in someone they love, that they were always worth more than whatever they were given. that they always had the strength to build something true, and that the most powerful inheritance in the world is not what sits in a vault or transfers through a legal document, but what lives in a person's spine, quiet and unshakable, on the days when everything is trying to tell them to be less than they are. Thomas Carter had known that. He had known it when he was 26 years old in a room full of people, telling him he was making a terrible mistake, and he had walked out anyway. He had known it every morning for 30 years when he picked up his lunch pail and went to fix the broken things a school's full of children, whose names he learned and whose problems he cared about because that was the kind of man he chose to be. He had known it in the letter he wrote to his daughter because he understood she was going to need it. And Emily Carter knew it now. She had always known it. She just needed the year that broke her open to find it.